I will start this. I don't want to necessarily say with a confession, but it's hard for me to not be thinking about everything that's gone on in the last year or two and think that this is a conversation I've been wanting to have, but also the anxious side of me is been reluctant to have it, which I think ties in a lot to the conversation that hopefully we're going to have over the next hour, and the
Mhm.
conversation that we as a culture and a society need to have for a lot longer than that. But
Yeah.
considering where you are in Portland, Oregon, and given what's happened there over the last year, if you can just kind of encompass what your perspective on it is, what you've seen, what you've experienced, and kind of from somebody who's right there in the middle.
Yeah. As you said, there we have been in transition actually I think for a while now, quite a few years, but I think it's we're starting to feel that in the last year, where it's like things are in front of our face that we can't unsee for all of us. um so being here in Portland, and which got a lot of recognition this year with the protest, and which were just happened back to back to back, and I was like, oh my god, of course this is how Portland is now going to be seen and on the map. We already were that kind of funky city anyways, and now we have this, which is such a main focus, but also there was so much not accurate information that was going out, about what was happening. I will share my perspective as a Black woman living in Portland, and has lived in Portland most of my life, and living through what we've all been living through this past year. It's been really difficult, like emotionally, spiritually. It has been really difficult. It's hard enough being one of very few, in Oregon. And Oregon has its own history of, Black exclusionary laws, and overt racism, and oppression of folks of color. So that in itself is, the realities that we are coming to head right now. I would say this past year, with the protests, I don't know how I was feeling about the protests, because again, Oregon is a very white state. And for me, it was hard in a way to be. I joined a couple because my daughters were very involved over the summer, and are activists themselves, and I'm all for marching for a cause and being a part of the movement. I'm all for that, but it's one thing to be a Black person in a movement where it's a sea of white faces yelling Black Lives Matter. That to me was really weird. I don't know another word to describe it. It's weird, right? Like, you're all for the cause, you're like, absolutely Black Lives Matter, but when you see just a sea of white faces, and you don't see a lot of faces that look like you, and all those faces are shouting Black Lives Matter, it's just like, yeah, they do, but it's weird being just the one Black person, in this movement. So for me, I didn't feel connected to the movements that were happening in Portland. And it's not to say that there weren't any Black folks or folks of color that were part of these protests. There were, and again, I'm not knocking the movement or the protests or anything like that. They were amazing. People came out, but as, again, one of very few in some of those situations, it was hard. And I remember telling my girls, I think we went to a couple of them, and I was like, all right, girls, I can't do anymore. I can't, unless we are with a group of other Black folks or other folks of color. I can't do any more of these large, massive protests. And again, being in Portland, there's not, we have Black folks here, but we're all kind of, either way east or way west, or living in Vancouver. There's not this community that used to be, you know, pre-90s, when I was growing up. That community wasn't there anymore, or isn't there anymore. And so what I came to, and I'll go back. So even just some examples of why it was weird for me being part of these larger groups. There was one point during one of the protests we went to where, you know, and there's probably 1,000 people, maybe, large group. And we're somewhere, you know, in the middle, I think. And, you know, we kind of stop and we do a prayer and kind of recognize some of the victims of police brutality and murder. And it's silent. And then the leaders was like, okay, so we want to invite all of Black folks. We want Black folks to come forward, to come to the front. And I was like, oh, that's great. So I grabbed my girls. I'm like, let's go to the front, because obviously there's more Black. This is exactly what I want, to march with, you know, other Black folks. So as we start moving and walking towards the front, it's just this applause. Like we're on The Price is Right or something. Like, it's like, yeah, all right, woohoo. And I was like, why are you applauding us for just walking to the front and being Black people? Like, it was just this very strange kind of, you know, moment of like, we're on a game show or something. And I thought, that how strange is that, to applaud Black folks just walking up to the front to have some space, you know. It was just the strangest thing. And then another one that we went to, I went with a neighbor who, because I was going to leave, I was going to drop my kids off, because I'm that kind of mom. I'm like, all right, you want to go get in the middle of it? Good luck. We'll see you in about an hour. Take care. You know, hope to come back. You know, go fight the power.
Mm-hmm.
You know. But one of my neighbors, I was there and was like, are you coming? Come on. And I was like, ah. So get out, start walking with her. And, you know, her kiddos and my kiddos, we kind of, they were like, we want to start a chant. So I said, great. You guys go up to the front, you know, lead it, go do it, you know. And there was probably a couple hundred people at this particular protest. And so as we're walking, and it's in our town that we live in Hillsborough. And as we're walking down the street, we're walking through the town, and there was people out in front, like, you know, who had heard, and I found out from a friend who's on those neighborhood like apps. There had been a message that had went out, like, they're gonna riot in Hillsborough and protect your property, and, you know, something. So as we're walking through the town, there's these people who are like sitting, you know, leaning against their cars, and, you know, by their storefronts, and just, you know, stone face and everything. And we're walking by, and we walked up by this one store, and there's a woman in there, and she's flipping us off, just for no reason, just giving us the middle finger as we're walking by. And I'm like, so, you know, again, this is about human rights, and it's too bad that you all don't support human rights. That's unfortunate. This is about humanity, and it's unfortunate that you don't see that, and you're pissed off for some reason that people are walking down the street. And then, you know, we weren't really hearing a lot of chanting or anything. So we were like, because our girls were all the way, we were kind of in the back, and the girls were all the way up in the front. And so we were like, okay, we'll meet up and see what's going on with them later. So the march ends up at this, you know, like downtown, and everybody kind of starts to gather, and there's speakers that are starting to come up, and we find the girls, and they're like, oh my gosh, Mom, like, we were trying to start a chant, and then we got shushed by this white woman who said, like, that this is a quiet protest, and that we shouldn't be yelling and disturbing the neighbors. And I was like, what? And, you know, I just thought, it was a Black Lives Matter march. Mm-hmm. And there are Black children who would like to chant Black Lives Matter, and they're getting shushed by a white woman telling them that this is a quiet protest.
Right. Because they don't want to upset the neighbors.
Because they don't want to upset the neighbors. And I was like, well, they should have thought about that before we started walking down the street, like getting that taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
So there were just frustrated and like, you know, what is the point of all of, again, and it's majority white folks, right?
Right.
So, you know, we're sitting there and I was getting so frustrated, and they had, you know, they were like, you know, we'd like for people to come up. If you want to talk, you know, feel free to come up and grab the bullhorn or whatever. And there was this gentleman who kept, they had the mayor like come and speak and say like a couple words or whatever. They were like, can you, this is your city, and there's, you know, the city is in need of change, and, you know, whatever, and what do you have to say to the people, blah, blah, blah. And there was this gentleman that just kept yelling, what are you gonna do, Steve? Our mayor's name is Steve. What are you gonna do, Steve? And like interrupting him, and it was just so rude. And I just thought, like, what does that prove, or what does that do to yell at the mayor that you have grievances with in front of all these people that's supposed to support Black people, like, and you're taking over and distracting and trying to make a scene and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I was like, I can't take it anymore. I gotta go say something. So I like went up and I asked the folks, you know, I was like, can I just say something, please? Like, there's things happening today that I'm not okay with, and I'm a Black person, so I feel like I could speak at a Black Lives Matter. I just want to put
in
that
theory, yeah.
So, you know, I don't really remember what I said, but I remember kind of yelling back to this gentleman who, you know, where I just said, listen, you don't throw stones. Like, don't ask Steve what he's doing. Like, what are you doing? You know?
Was he a white gentleman or a Black gentleman?
Yeah. No, he was white.
Okay.
And he said, well, we have to hold Steve accountable. And I was like, well, how about you hold yourself accountable? Like, what are you going to do after this march to support
right.
Black? Like, what are you doing in your home and in your world, you know, to support outside of this march, which this will be done here in like 20 minutes. So how are you going to support afterwards? Right. Don't yell at Steve. I don't even know Steve. I don't know what Steve does. I don't know what Steve did, but don't yell at him if you don't do anything. Right.
Sure.
So those two specific experiences for me, I was kind of done in participating because it took too much emotional energy, and just it didn't feel, you know, and not to say people were out there doing the work and doing their thing, but then you had people also taking selfies, and like it was this kind of like, look what I did kind of thing, right? Which again, for a Black person, we don't want to see that. If you're here to support, then you got to be here to support and not look cute and get the selfie and, you know, say I did something, I went to a march, you know. So I actually, and I don't know what I was thinking, I actually was like, I'm going to organize my own march for Black folks in Portland, like, because I need that, and others that I know need that too. I want to do a Black Lives March for Black people by Black people. Who knew? Who would have thunk it, right?
Radical idea.
And again, the images that were coming out of Portland was white folks for the most part. So I thought, how great would that be to have a visual, or to have a moment centered around Black folks in Portland? Because, and again, you think of the history in Portland and gentrification and redlining and all of these things. And so again, I'm not an organizer. I've never put on a march. I've never done a rally. I've never done any of that. But I have resources and I know people. And so I reached out to those folks, and I reached out to my resources, and we pulled something together. It took us a couple of months to plan, but we had this amazing day in Portland. And it was joyous, and we, there were white folks involved, but it was one of those things where, you know, it was like, okay, so, because of course it was like, we want to help and we want to do this. And it was like, you can help, but we need you to follow directions. Like,
right.
There are boundaries and borders with this. If you are a non-Black person, if you would like to help and come volunteer, if you'd like to hand out water, if you would like to do this, that's all you do. You don't get to chant. You don't get to be part of the march. Like, you can be on the perimeter, but this is not your thing, right? The focus is centered on Black folks and Blackness right now, and Black. Our theme was Black existence is resistance. Mm-hmm. So it was like, you know, you can be on the perimeter, but all of this in the middle is the focus. And it was a beautiful day. I mean, the folks that did come to volunteer, they were amazing. I mean, they stayed in their lane. They were supportive. They, you know, did not interrupt. They weren't like, you know, and it was kind of a beautiful mix of just humans coming together, right? And actually centering Blackness without it being a thing. It wasn't like, you know, you're taking something away from me, or that's not fair, and it should be everybody, and everybody should be together, and I should be allowed to say Black Lives Matter too. And there was like none of that. It was just like, tell me what you need me to do. I'll stay in my lane. I'll do this. And Black folks were allowed to actually be together. Mm-hmm. And have a moment and be part of the movement. And the non-Black folks that were there, that were volunteering, was like, I mean, it was great. It was beautiful. It was awesome. And then it got cold, and then, you know, because we wanted to plan like another, but then of course it's Portland and it started raining, and then there was that. So the hope is that we can pick that back up as we go, to have more moments like that, especially for Black folks in Portland and beyond. But that you know, is a long-winded version or answer to your question around how my perspective and how I've seen things in Portland kind of happen.
Hey guys, Devin here. Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and check out the links below for more great original content. Talk to you soon. Bye.